I'm standing in the rain, tears streaming, screaming at my parents after finding out they bought my brother a brand new Ford Escape while I'd been paying their bills for 7 years straight. I'm Tessa, the one who always stepped up, while Brayden didn't lift a finger. But what happened next? It's the kind of twist that flipped my whole world upside down, and trust me, you won't see it coming. Ever had a family moment that broke your heart or set you free? Drop your story below. I'd love to hear how you'd handle this mess. Rain pattered against the windows of our little wooden house, a soft drum roll that matched the ache settling into my bones. I never thought I'd spend 7 years footing my parents' bills while my brother Brayden just kicked back and watched. But there I was, hunched over the kitchen table in the fall of 2015, the glow of my laptop screen casting shadows on the chipped formica. Jasper sat across from me, his flannel sleeves rolled up, cradling a mug of Folgers that filled the air with its familiar, earthy scent. Outside, wet leaves clung to the ground, a soggy carpet under Salem's gray sky. I figured back then it'd only be a few months. Boy, was I wrong. I tapped the keys with a sigh, pulling up the bank account that seemed to shrink faster every month. Dad had lost his job at the lumber mill that summer, and Mom's texts had started coming like clockwork. Tessa, honey, we're a little short. That night, I wrote a check for $500, my handwriting shaky from too much coffee and too little sleep. The pen scratched against the paper, each stroke a quiet promise I wasn't sure I could keep. Jasper glanced over, his hazel eyes narrowing as steam curled from his mug. "They ever say thanks?" he asked, voice low but edged with something I couldn't quite place. I shrugged, reaching for the coffee pot between us. "It's what family does," I muttered, pouring myself another cup, the dark liquid sloshing against the rim. The warmth seeped into my palms, but it didn't touch the chill inside. Later, I leaned back in the chair, stretching my stiff neck, and opened Facebook to unwind. That's when I saw it. Brayden's post, bold as daylight. A photo of him grinning in those shiny new Nike sneakers, the kind I'd been eyeing at the store but skipped to save a few bucks. The caption read, "Thanks, Mom." My stomach twisted, a slow knot tightening as I stared at the screen. He was 25, living a few blocks away in a basement apartment he barely paid for, and here I was, 28, scraping by with Jasper in a house that needed more repairs than we could afford. I clicked the laptop shut, the sound sharp in the quiet kitchen, and rubbed my eyes. Mom's voice echoed in my head from last week's call. "Brayden's just finding his way, you know." Finding his way with my money, I thought, but I swallowed the bitterness like I always did. The rain picked up, tapping harder against the glass, and my phone buzzed on the table. Another text from Mom. "We're short again. Can you send more?" I snatched it up, my thumb hovering over the screen, and something snapped. I gripped the mug so hard my knuckles turned white, the ceramic creaking under my fingers. Jasper looked up, eyebrows raised, but I just shook my head. "They're fine," I said, more to myself than him, setting the mug down with a thud. The first crack in my patience split wide open, a jagged line I couldn't see yet, running deep beneath the surface. I stood and walked to the window, peering out at the pine forest beyond Salem, my old escape spot I hadn't visited in months. The trees swayed in the wind, dark and silent, like they were waiting for me to figure out what I'd gotten myself into. Life's funny that way. You give a little, thinking it's temporary, but some folks take it as permission to lean forever. I didn't realize it yet, but those 7 years were going to bury me, slowly, quietly, one check at a time. The rain hammered our roof like it was trying to break in, a steady thump that echoed the unease I'd been carrying for months. 6 years in, I was still cutting checks while Brayden flaunted a new TV on Mom's Facebook, a shiny 4K monstrosity that mocked me every time I scrolled past. It was a cold winter evening in 2021, and I knelt under the kitchen sink with Jasper, my hands fumbling with a wrench as water dripped from a busted pipe. The air smelled of cocoa steaming on the counter, a small comfort against the chill seeping through the walls of our Salem house. Jasper had kept saying they played favorites, his voice a quiet nag in the back of my mind, but I didn't want to hear it. Not yet. I'd spent the afternoon digging through an old shoebox, receipts spilling across the table like confetti from a life I barely recognized. $35,000 sent to Mom and Dad since 2015, scribbled in faded ink while my Honda rusted in the driveway, its muffler rattling louder every day. Jasper tightened a bolt, his brow furrowed as he glanced up at me. "You're gonna ruin your back down here," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. I forced a smile, brushing damp hair from my face, but my mind was on those numbers. Years of saying no to new curtains or a decent coat so they could keep the lights on. The roof leak plinked into a bucket behind us, a steady reminder of what I'd let slide. By noon, I'd bundled up and trudged through the rain to a little coffee shop on State Street, where Nora waited with her usual sharp grin. She'd been my rock at the accounting firm for years, always quick with a quip or a curse. I slid into the booth, the warmth of the place wrapping around me like a hug, and spilled it all. Brayden's new TV, Mom's proud post, the way it gnawed at me. Nora leaned forward, her coffee cup clinking against the saucer. "You're still paying their rent for this?" she snapped, her voice cutting through the hum of the shop. I stared into my mug, the steam curling up like a question I couldn't answer. "They've had a rough patch," I said weakly, but her frown told me she wasn't buying it. She shook her head, muttering something about fools and family that I pretended not to hear. Back home, the kitchen was dim, the cocoa gone cold. Jasper sat at the table, scrolling on his phone, and when he turned it toward me, my breath caught. There was Brayden on Mom's Facebook, grinning next to that TV, a Starbucks cup in hand like some kind of trophy. "Look at this," Jasper said, his tone flat but his eyes sharp. I swallowed hard, fingers tightening around the edge of the counter. "They're just generous," I mumbled, the words tasting like a lie even as they left my mouth. He didn't push, just set the phone down and went back to the sink, but the silence between us grew heavy, pressing against my ribs. Later, I couldn't stand it anymore. I grabbed my phone and dialed Mom, pacing the linoleum as the rain drummed overhead. "Hey, about Brayden's TV," I started, keeping my voice light. She chirped back, bright as a bird. "Oh, honey, he needed a pick-me-up. Things have been so hard for him." I froze, the phone slipping in my grip as her words sank in. Hard for him? My hands shook as I hung up without a goodbye, staring at the ceiling where water dripped through a crack we couldn't afford to fix. The bucket caught each drop with a hollow plink, and I stood there, rooted, feeling the weight of 6 years shift into something I couldn't name. Sometimes you don't see the cracks until they're too wide to mend, and I was starting to see them everywhere. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Something ugly was festering, coiling tight in my chest, and I knew it wasn't going away. The rain had turned vicious by early spring, pelting our house like it held a grudge, and I stood in the kitchen with a phone pressed to my ear, desperation clawing at my throat. I begged for $2,000 to fix our roof, and Mom laughed like I'd asked for a private jet, her giggle sharp and careless through the line. It was 2022, and the leak upstairs had gone from a drip to a steady stream, soaking through the ceiling and pooling on the hardwood. Jasper and I had scrubbed clean too many times. I'd tossed and turned the night before, that ugly, festering thing in my chest growing louder, and Jasper's voice rang in my head, "They don't give a damn about your needs." He'd been right all along, and I was starting to feel it. I paced the linoleum, my socks damp from a puddle I hadn't mopped yet, and waited for Mom to stop chuckling. "Can you loan me $2,000? Rain's ruining the house," I pleaded, my voice tighter than I meant it to be. "Oh, hun, we're not your bank," she said, still half laughing, like it was some big joke. I bit my lip hard enough to taste metal, staring at the cracked ceiling as her words sank in. 6 years of checks, late nights balancing their books, and she couldn't spare a dime? The line went quiet, and I mumbled a quick, "Okay," before hanging up, my fingers trembling as I set the phone down. Jasper looked up from the stove where he was flipping pancakes, the sizzle of batter a soft hum against the rain. "What did she say?" he asked, spatula hovering. "Nothing useful," I replied, snatching my keys from the counter. He set the pan aside, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Go see where their money's going," he said, his tone firm but gentle, like he knew I needed the push. My heart pounded as I yanked on my coat, the fabric cold and stiff against my skin. The drive to Mom and Dad's mobile home was a blur of wet streets and blurred headlights. Salem's gray sprawl stretching out under a sky that wouldn't quit crying. Rain soaked through my hood by the time I parked, the muddy gravel crunching under my boots as I trudged to their door. The oven's warmth hit me first when I knocked, a wave of cinnamon rolls wafting out as Dad opened up, his flannel shirt rumpled and his hand jingling a set of shiny new car keys. "Tessa?" he said, surprised, stepping aside. I brushed past, water dripping onto their faded rug, and there was Mom, beaming from the kitchenette in her apron. "We got Brayden a Ford Escape," she announced, like she'd won a prize, her voice bright with pride. "He deserves it. Been so down lately." I stopped dead, my coat dripping, staring at the keys in Dad's hand. A Ford Escape? That wasn't cheap. My jaw tightened, and I could barely hear the rain over the blood rushing in my ears. "Why?" I managed, my voice low and hoarse. Mom tilted her head, wiping floury hands on a towel. "What do you mean, hon?" she asked, all innocence. Dad shifted, looking at the floor, those keys still clinking in his grip. 7 years, I said, stepping closer, rain sliding down my face and mixing with the heat in my eyes. 7 years of my money, thousands, and you can't help me with a leaky roof, but Brayden gets a car? My voice cracked with rage, splintering like the wood upstairs at home. Mom's smile faltered, then hardened. "Don't be dramatic, Tessa. He needed a boost," she snapped. Dad muttered something about calming down, but I didn't hear it. I flashed back to that $800 I'd sent for their fridge 2 summers ago, how I'd eaten ramen for weeks while mine hummed on its last legs. And now this? The air felt thick, suffocating, and I choked out, 7 years of my money and this is what I get? The words raw, tearing free like a sob. I turned on my heel, boots slamming the rug, and stormed out into the downpour. Mom's, "Wait!" fading behind me. My hands shook as I fumbled with the car door, rain blurring my vision, but I didn't care. I'd carried them long enough, through layoffs, late bills, excuses, and I was done. Sometimes you give until you're hollow, hoping they'll notice, but they just keep taking. I wasn't sure what I'd do next, but as I peeled out of their driveway, tires spinning in the mud, I knew I was done swallowing their crap. Rain lashed the windshield as I screeched into Mom and Dad's driveway, my boots hitting the gravel with a fury I couldn't contain. I didn't just walk away, I ripped it all apart, and it felt like breaking chains that had choked me for years. That spring day in 2022, after seeing those car keys in Dad's hand, every lie they'd fed me over 7 years lit up like a bonfire in my chest, searing through the fog of duty I'd lived under. I'd stormed out of their mobile home minutes ago, but the sting of Mom's words, "He deserves it," drove me right back. I shoved the door open, the hinges squeaking against the damp frame, and stepped into the living room where the air hung thick with Nescafe, and the drone of Dr. Phil preaching from the TV. Mom stood by the worn sofa, arms crossed, her apron still dusted with cinnamon from those rolls I'd smelled earlier. Dad hovered near the recliner, eyes on the floor, while the rain pounded the tin roof like it wanted in on the fight. My voice trembled as I barged in, water dripping from my coat onto the shag carpet. "You bought Brayden a car with my money, and I can't get $2,000 for my roof?" I said, the words spilling out raw and jagged. Mom brushed it off with a flick of her hand, her lips curling into that familiar half smile. "He needed it more, Tessa. Things have been tough for him," she replied, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I blinked, my breath catching as her excuse landed like a slap. Tough for him? My hands curled into fists, nails digging into my palms, and I could feel the heat rising behind my eyes. Dad shifted, his slippers scuffing the floor. "Don't make a fuss, Tess," he mumbled, barely looking up, his voice soft as the rain outside. That did it. Something snapped, and tears burned hot as I stepped closer, my soaked boots squeaking. 7 years, I snapped, my voice rising over the TV. $40,000 of my money, and you laugh in my face when I need help. The numbers tumbled out, each one a stone I'd carried too long. Every late night, every skipped vacation, every time I'd told Jasper next year for fixing our house. Mom's eyes narrowed, but before she could speak, the kitchen door creaked open and Brayden sauntered in, a smirk plastered across his face. "Chill out, sis. You're always so dramatic," he said, leaning against the counter with that cocky tilt of his head. My fists clenched tighter, knuckles whitening, and I could almost hear the echo of his laughter from years of parties I'd funded without knowing. "You don't get to talk," I spat, turning on him, my chest heaving. "You've done nothing while I've kept them afloat." Mom stepped forward, her voice sharp now. "That's enough, Tessa. You're acting like we owe you something." "Owe me?" The room spun, the Nescafe scent turning sour in my nose, and I laughed, a brittle, broken sound. "Owe me?" I said, tears spilling down my cheeks. "I've given you everything." Dad reached out a hand, but I shook him off, my gaze locked on Mom. "You'll regret turning on us," she yelled, her face twisting with anger. That was the last straw. I spun toward the door, my hand slamming the frame so hard the wood shuddered, and I sobbed, "You'll regret using me." The words tore free, a howl against the storm, and I stumbled out into the rain, my coat flapping as the cold bit into my skin. I fumbled into the car, hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, the wet leather slick under my fingers. My breath came in gasps, fogging the windshield, and I flashed back to those late nights balancing their bills, spreadsheets glowing on my laptop, while Brayden partied with friends I'd never met. 7 years of my life poured into their hands, and they'd handed it to him like it was nothing. The rain blurred the road as I peeled out, tires spinning on the gravel, and my phone buzzed like crazy in my pocket. Texts, calls, whatever they'd throw next. I didn't look. I'd carried their weight long enough, and as the miles stretched between us, I knew they'd hit back hard. You can love folks with all you've got, but when they take it for granted, there's a line you've got to draw, and I'd just drawn mine in the sand. Sunlight poured through the kitchen window, a rare gift after months of Oregon rain, and I stood by the counter, watching dust motes dance in the beams. Mom turned Facebook into her stage that summer of 2022, but I wasn't about to let her rewrite my story, not after I'd ripped everything apart just weeks ago. She'd always played the victim card, her tears a practiced art, and I'd fallen for it too many times. This time, I called her bluff. The new roof overhead felt like a hard-won badge, its shingles gleaming where leaks once ruled, and Jasper moved quietly beside me, steeping Lipton tea in a chipped mug. Outside, crickets hummed in the warm evening air, a peaceful drone that clashed with the storm brewing in my pocket. I'd barely settled into the calm when my phone pinged, a sharp chirp that made me flinch. I swiped it open, and there it was, Mom's post glaring back at me. My daughter abandoned us after all we've done. My throat tightened as I scrolled, each word a twist of the knife she'd wielded so well. Then Brayden's comment popped up, snarky and bold. "She's always been selfish, finally showing it." I let out a slow breath, my fingers hovering over the screen, the kitchen's warmth fading as their words sank in. I'd driven away from their place with my phone buzzing like a hornet's nest, knowing they'd hit back hard, but seeing it laid out like this, public, ugly, made my stomach churn. Jasper glanced over, his tea steaming in his hand, and raised an eyebrow. "What now?" he asked, voice steady as ever. I turned the phone toward him, and he shook his head, setting the mug down with a soft clink. "They're shameless," he muttered. The screen lit up again, this time a text from Nora, my fierce friend from the accounting firm. "They're full of it. Tell everyone," she wrote, her words sharp even in pixels. I paced to the sink, staring out at the backyard where the grass glowed golden in the dusk, and felt Jasper's hand on my shoulder. "You've got the receipts. Use them," he said, nodding toward my phone like it was a weapon I'd forgotten I held. He was right. I'd canceled their auto payments that morning, my finger hovering over the bank app before pressing confirm. A quiet victory after years of giving. I sank into a chair, the wood creaking under me, and opened Facebook again. My hand steadied as I typed, each keystroke a release. 7 years, $40,000 from me, and they bought Brayden a Ford Escape while my house leaked. I hit post, my heart thudding, and watched the screen flare to life. Friends flooded in fast, Carol from church. That's insane. Old classmate Pete. No way they did that. Their outrage a chorus I hadn't expected, but desperately needed. The comments piled up, a tide turning against Mom's script, when my phone rang, the shrill tone cutting through the cricket's song. Mom's name flashed, and I could hear her voice in my head, high-pitched, accusing, before it even connected. I let it ring out, the sound fading into silence as I leaned back, exhaustion washing over me. Jasper slid his tea across the table, and I took it, the warmth seeping into my palms as I stared at the screen. My post had blown up. Shares, likes, a message from my cousin Linda. I had no clue they did you like that. Her words hit soft, a balm against the sting, and I scrolled through the support, each note chipping away at the guilt Mom had planted. Nora texted again. Told you, people see the truth when you show it. I managed a small smile, setting the phone face down, but the quiet didn't last. A knock rattled the door, firm and insistent, and my pulse spiked. Jasper's eyes met mine, steady but wary, and I pushed the chair back, its legs scraping the floor. I'd drawn my line in the sand, but Mom wasn't done playing her game. Not by a long shot. Sometimes standing up for yourself means weathering the storm that follows. I just didn't know how loud it'd get. The porch boards creaked under my bare feet as I stepped outside, a watering can dangling from my hand, the summer sun of 2024 warming my shoulders after weeks of Salem's stubborn rain. 2 years on, Mom showed up crying at my door, but I'd already left her world behind, her tears no match for the peace I'd carved out since that stormy spring of 2022. I'd spent years hoping they'd see me, pouring my heart into checks and late-night calls. But it turns out I just needed to see myself, to stand tall under a roof Jasper and I had fixed with our own hands. The violets bloomed in their pots, purple bursts against the weathered wood, and I bent to tend them, the air sweet with earth and sunlight. Then came the knock, sharp, insistent, a ripple through the quiet I'd fought so hard to claim. I straightened, brushing dirt from my fingers, and saw them through the screen door. Mom. Her face streaked with tears, and Dad lingering behind, his shoulders slumped under a faded flannel shirt. I pushed the door open, the hinges groaning, and stood firm on the threshold. "We're broke, Tessa. Help us," Mom said, her voice breaking as she clutched her purse, mascara smudging under her eyes. Dad sighed, a heavy sound that sank into the porch. "Let's not end it like this," he murmured, his gaze drifting to the violets like they held some answer. I crossed my arms, feeling the cool metal of the screen frame against my elbow, and let the silence stretch. "You ended it in 2022, I said finally, my tone cool and steady, each word a brick in the wall I'd built over 2 years. Mom's sobs hitched, but I didn't flinch, not this time. I'd spent too long bending, breaking, hoping they'd notice the cracks, and I was done. "Brayden's 34th time he steps up," I added, my voice cutting through her sniffles like a clean blade. Mom's eyes flashed, her tears giving way to a familiar spark of anger. "You're heartless," she snapped, stepping closer, her purse swinging like a weapon she didn't know how to use. I held her gaze, unblinking, and felt a weight lift, light as the breeze rustling the violets. "No, I'm finished," I said, and pushed the door shut, the click of the latch a soft finality. Her muffled protests faded as I turned away, my bare feet padding back to the kitchen where Jasper waited, his silhouette framed against the window. He wrapped an arm around me, warm and solid, and pressed a kiss to my temple. "You're free, babe," he whispered, his breath tickling my ear. I smiled, a real one that reached my eyes, and stepped back to the porch, picking up the watering can again. 7 years felt like a distant shadow, a memory I could finally let fade. Later, I sat at the table with my phone, the screen glowing in the dimming light. Mom's number blinked up at me. Missed calls, voicemails I wouldn't play. Brayden's smug face lingered in my mind from that last Facebook post I'd seen, and Dad's quiet sighs echoed from every plea they'd made. I opened my contacts, my thumb steady as I blocked them one by one. Mom, Dad, Brayden, each tap severing the last strings they'd tangled around me. Then Facebook, a few swipes, and their names vanished from my feed, a clean slate where their guilt trips used to live. I leaned back, the chair creaking, and let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. The crickets sang louder now, a chorus beyond the screen door, and I walked outside once more, the watering can cool in my grip. I tipped it over the violets, water glistening on their petals, and Nora's voice echoed from last week's lunch at the diner. "You're tougher than they'll ever know." She'd grinned over her coffee, proud as punch, and I'd laughed, feeling the truth of it settle in my bones. You can spend a lifetime waiting for others to give you what you deserve, but peace comes when you claim it for yourself. I watered the violets, the sun dipping low over Salem's pines, and wondered if they'd ever get it. Mom with her tears, Dad with his sighs, Brayden with his smirk. But it wasn't my burden anymore. As I stood on my porch that summer day in 2024, watching the violets sway in the breeze, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years, a quiet reward for finally choosing myself after all the giving. Life's funny that way. Sometimes it takes losing what you cling to most to find what really matters. Love isn't about how much you sacrifice, but how much you're seen. I'd learned that family can break your heart, yet there's strength in letting go and building anew with those who truly care. If my story stirs something in you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. After all, we've all got a tale or two worth sharing.